I stepped out onto my front porch that morning and nearly tripped over my own disbelief. 6 massive oak trees, my pride and joy, lay in splintered ruins across my yard. The scent of sawdust mixed with the morning air, a bitter perfume I couldn't breathe past. My hands shook, my stomach knotted. These weren't just trees, they were memories. Each one planted in honor of Sarah. Each one a living tribute to the years we shared, to the garden we had dreamed of, to the quiet evenings under their shade. I sank onto the porch steps, trying to make sense of the devastation. Neighbors were beginning to gather, drawn by the commotion. I recognized a few familiar faces, Laura Green and Mark Bell, both wide-eyed and pale. Whispered comments floated in the air, thick with shock and disbelief. "I can't believe she did this again," Laura muttered, her voice trembling. I didn't even look at her. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the jagged stumps that had once been my solace, my connection to Sarah's memory. My mind raced, a whirlwind of grief, confusion, and anger. Someone had cut them down with precision, almost surgical. And they hadn't left a note, not a word, except for something taped to one of the stumps. I walked over, heart hammering, and saw it, a laminated document labeled City Emergency Tree Removal Authorization. My eyes narrowed. Something didn't feel right. The signature looked official enough, but my gut screamed otherwise. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands, reading and rereading every line. It claimed that the city had ordered the removal of hazardous trees on community property for safety reasons. My property, my trees, community property? My mind spun. I went back inside, unable to sit still. The document stared back at me from the kitchen counter. Something about it smelled wrong. It didn't match the formal language of the city notices I'd received over the years. There was no official seal, no proper reference number, no verifiable point of contact. My gut told me this was a forgery. I grabbed my laptop and began the tedious search through city records, cross-referencing the names, the numbers, the dates. Nothing. Not a single mention. No permits, no authorizations, nothing. The more I searched, the angrier I became. My heart pounded, not just from grief, but from a boiling realization. Someone had deliberately destroyed my trees. Someone had lied, forged documents, and trespassed on my property. I paced my kitchen, my hands pulling at my hair, replaying the past 6 years since Sarah passed. These trees were supposed to be her living legacy. And now they were reduced to splintered stumps, a cruel monument to someone else's audacity. That's when the anger fully took hold. My grief twisted into determination. I couldn't let this go. Not as a personal loss, not as a violation of our home. Not when someone had so clearly taken liberties with our lives, our memories, and our property. I sat down and made the decision that would change everything. I needed professional help. I needed someone who understood the law, someone who could guide me through this mess and help me fight back. I pulled out the phone and dialed the number of Eleanor Davis, a local lawyer with a reputation for taking on tough, unconventional cases. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call would set into motion a chain of events that would uncover corruption, greed, and lies that went far beyond my yard. It was the first step in what would become a battle not just for my trees, but for my entire neighborhood. And as I held that phone to my ear, listening to the dial tone, I knew one thing with crystal clarity. This was personal. After hanging up with Eleanor, I couldn't sit still. My mind raced, circling back to that fake city emergency tree removal authorization. Whoever had done this didn't just trespass, they tried to make it look legal. My grief for the lost trees morphed into a cold, sharp anger. Someone had violated my home, my memories, and my trust, and I was going to find out who. I started with a simple call to the city's Department of Public Works. My hands shook slightly as I repeated the details of the authorization over the phone. The clerk's response confirmed my worst suspicion. No such emergency order existed. No records, no permits, no inspections, nothing. "Sir," the voice said gently, "we have no record of any authorized removal at your address. Are you sure you have the correct documentation?" I clenched the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, I was sure. That laminated document in my hands was a lie. I hung up, staring at the remnants of my oak trees through the window. The anger had started simmering at first, but now it boiled over. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone had planned this. My next thought was chilling. The person who did this must have wanted to intimidate me, or worse, send a message. But who and why? I went outside to inspect the stumps closer. Each cut was precise, almost surgical, as if the trees had been eliminated with a purpose. And then I noticed something odd. The cuts were clean, but there were tire tracks leading up from the lake behind the property. The earth was pressed down in a pattern that suggested heavy equipment, not just chainsaws. Whoever had done this had access to machines powerful enough to fell mature oaks in a single morning. Neighbors were now standing in small clusters, whispering to one another. Laura Green approached, her hands on her hips, face pale. "Henry, I don't understand. Who could do something like this?" Her eyes were wide, almost pleading. I shook my head slowly, unable to answer. "Laura, I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." The thought hit me like a hammer. This wasn't just about grief or anger anymore. Someone had broken the law, misrepresented themselves as a government authority, and destroyed private property. This was criminal, and I wasn't about to let it slide. I started piecing together what little I knew. My neighborhood wasn't perfect. There had been disputes over property lines, minor HOA conflicts, and occasional arguments over landscaping or noise. But nothing on this scale. Whoever did this had knowledge, resources, and, most importantly, a motive that went beyond petty neighborhood quarrels. I went back inside and opened my laptop again, diving into HOA records and emails. Maybe, just maybe, there was a clue hidden in plain sight. My eyes scanned the board meeting minutes from the past year, looking for mentions of tree removals, property disputes, or any unusual requests. And there it was, a note buried deep in a meeting report, a discussion about the lakefront property and restructuring community space for safety and aesthetics. Nothing official, just vague language, but enough to make my stomach twist. My grief returned, sharper now, mixed with a gnawing sense of betrayal. These trees were part of a memorial, a legacy of love, and it felt like someone had violated not just my property, but my personal history, trying to erase it with a chainsaw. Finally, I knew I couldn't tackle this alone. I needed a lawyer who could navigate the mess of HOA politics, property law, and potential fraud. I pulled out the phone again and called Eleanor Davis, explaining the full scope of what I had discovered. Her calm, measured voice on the other end was a relief. "Henry, you're right to be concerned. This isn't just vandalism. Someone went to great lengths to make this look official. Let's schedule a meeting first thing tomorrow, and we'll figure out our next steps." I hung up and sank into my favorite chair, staring at the stumps one last time. The pain was still there, raw and jagged, but now it was joined by a sense of purpose. Whoever had done this had underestimated me. I would not let them get away with it. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back. This wasn't just about trees anymore. This was justice, and I was ready. The next morning, I woke with the kind of restless energy that only comes from a night spent wrestling with rage and determination. I had a plan forming in my head. This wasn't just a vandalism case anymore. It was shaping up to be something much bigger. Someone had crossed a line, and I intended to find out exactly who and make them pay. I started with my neighbors. Word had already spread about the trees. Laura Green came over first, bringing her usual bright determination. "Henry, I heard about what happened. This is awful. I don't know how anyone could—" She trailed off, her voice tight with anger. I cut in. "Laura, this isn't just awful. It's illegal. And I think whoever did this has been operating like this for a while. I need to know if anyone else has had issues with, well, with authority in this neighborhood." Laura nodded, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "It's Constance Petton," she whispered. My heart sank at the name. I'd known her as the HOA president, the one who seemed to wield power like a weapon. She was always insisting on fines, forcing landscaping changes, and generally micromanaging everyone's property. But to this extent, destroying 6 mature oaks in someone's yard, that was beyond imagination. Over the next 2 days, I began a systematic effort to gather allies. I called Henderson, the longtime community volunteer who had been quietly documenting Constance's overreaches for years. He brought boxes of files, invoices, and emails. "Henry, I didn't know what to do before, but after seeing your trees," he shook his head. This crosses the line." Together, we reviewed contracts, payments, and notices that didn't add up. Fines issued for imaginary violations, landscaping paid for twice, and mysteriously lost HOA funds that seemed to benefit Constance or her friends. The pattern was growing clearer by the hour. I also reached out to a lawyer, Marcus Bennett, a man whose reputation for taking on complex property disputes preceded him. Marcus arrived on a bright Tuesday morning, his briefcase heavy with legal folders and determination. "Henry," he said, scanning the yard, "these trees aren't just property, they're part of a larger picture of unlawful activity. We need evidence, witnesses, and an airtight case." Marcus brought 2 associates, specialists who would prove essential. Lisa Rodriguez, a forensic accountant with a sharp eye for financial discrepancies, had already begun dissecting HOA records before she even arrived. Within minutes, she pointed to spreadsheets that looked like a puzzle waiting to be solved. "Look here," she said, tracing her finger down a column of numbers. $23,000 in legal fees paid to a private attorney during divorce proceedings, all through HOA funds. Landscaping services paid to companies she owns. Maintenance that never happened. This isn't just shady bookkeeping, it's embezzlement. Janet Morrison, an environmental lawyer specializing in tree and land preservation, examined photographs of the oak grove. 40-year-old white oaks, she muttered. "This is catastrophic damage. Replacement alone could run close to $90,000. But there's more: soil destabilization, potential erosion, even risk to neighboring foundations. Whoever did this didn't just destroy property, they created a long-term environmental liability." As Marcus outlined the strategy, I felt a mixture of awe and resolve. "We're not just filing a civil suit," he said. "We're building a multi-front legal campaign: tree damages, property reversion, criminal referrals, and professional licensing complaints. Timing is everything. We hit all angles simultaneously. She won't have a chance to cover her tracks." While the legal team worked, I took on community coordination. Word of the tree massacre had traveled fast, and neighbors began reaching out with their own horror stories. Henderson had proof of $8,000 in bogus community center repairs. Johnson had photos of an HOA-mandated landscaping change that benefited only Constance, and Laura shared a diary of fines imposed on her family for supposed violations that never existed. The most damning piece came from an unexpected source, Carol Martinez, whose husband was Deputy Martinez. Her voice trembled over the phone. "Henry, my husband came home sick after supervising that tree removal. Constance told him it was authorized by the city, but there's no record. She even offered him $500 to look the other way. He thought it was overtime pay until he realized what really happened. That conversation alone could prove bribery and the manipulation of city officials." By Friday evening, Marcus and his team had pieced together a preliminary assessment. Criminal referrals were ready for the county prosecutor and state attorney general, civil lawsuits prepared for state and federal court, and licensing complaints queued for submission. But the legal strategy wasn't the only key to our success. Ohio law allows homeowners to reclaim illegally privatized common areas through majority vote. And documentation proved that Constance's lakefront property, which she had long claimed as her own, legally belonged to the community. Janet's environmental assessment added another layer. "This land falls under the protected wetland buffer in the original development plan," she explained, showing me government maps and regulatory reports. "Removing those trees isn't just property destruction. It's a federal environmental violation, potentially adding another $200,000 in penalties." Constance had thought she was improving her lake view. In reality, she had just violated federal law. Our community rallied. Henderson organized neighbors to document every interaction with Constance over the years. By Thursday, 7 families had collected records showing harassment, fines, and forced compliance. Emails, photographs, receipts, and affidavits created a digital fortress of evidence. Then came the breakthrough. Deputy Martinez, after talking with his wife, handed over an official statement detailing Constance's coercion attempts, offering money for false authorizations and manipulating him into enabling the tree removal. This insider testimony was priceless, a direct account from someone she had tried to bribe. Meanwhile, Constance's desperation became obvious. She began filing counterclaims against me, alleging harassment and defamation, even assigning dates that could be disproven by cell phone records and home security footage. Every move she made became another brick in the wall of evidence we were constructing. Her strategy was unraveling before my eyes. By the end of the week, the stage was set for a multi-front assault. Criminal charges for fraud, bribery, and conspiracy, civil claims for damages and property reversion, and professional complaints to revoke her real estate license. The community, once paralyzed by fear, was now united. Everyone had a voice, and everyone had proof. Standing in my yard that Friday evening, I looked at the stumps of the oak trees with a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as grief had transformed into action. These trees, once memories of Sarah, were now symbols of resilience and justice. The fight wasn't just for me, it was for the entire neighborhood, for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of bullying, corruption, or greed. Marcus clapped a hand on my shoulder as we surveyed the files spread across my dining room table. "Henry, by Monday morning, Constance won't know what hit her. We're ready." And for the first time in 6 years, I felt like we had the upper hand. The pieces were in place. The evidence, the witnesses, the legal strategy, and the community support. All that remained was the execution, and ensuring that the person who had thought she was untouchable finally faced the consequences of her actions. Sunday morning arrived with a tension that made my chest tight. I barely slept, haunted by visions of the destroyed oak grove and the injustice Constance had inflicted on our neighborhood. But there was also a spark of anticipation. Today, everything would come to a head. Today, Constance's reign of fear, greed, and corruption would finally face the light. By 1:30 p.m., the community center parking lot was overflowing. Cars lined the street, neighbors buzzing in low conversations, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and simmering anger. Local news crews had arrived, cameras pointed at the entrance, capturing the growing crowd. I could see Henderson, Laura, and Johnson huddled together, folders in hand, each containing years of meticulously gathered evidence. Inside, Constance sat at the head table, dressed in her usual black suit. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, aware of the reporters but trying to maintain her air of control. Flanking her on either side were 2 board members who looked as uneasy as I felt powerful. And then I saw her husband, Richard, sweating despite the air conditioning, clearly unsettled by the gathering storm. I took a deep breath and stepped in, carrying my own folder of evidence. My voice trembled slightly at first as I addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know everyone here has endured unfair treatment under our HOA leadership. Today, you will see the full scope of what has been happening and why your voices finally matter." Constance slammed her gavel, trying to assert authority. "This meeting is called to order. The agenda includes discussion of ongoing disputes and financial decisions. Let's proceed." I raised my folder higher. Before any votes are taken, this community deserves the truth. Constance Pettin has embezzled $347,000 in HOA funds, bribed government officials, and illegally occupied community property valued at over $800,000. This isn't speculation, this is documented evidence. A ripple of shock ran through the room. I could see reporters raising cameras, neighbors whispering, and Constance's composure starting to crack. She opened her mouth to speak, but then hesitated. Agent Sarah Bennett, sitting quietly near the back, finally spoke. Her badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Pettin, you are not required to speak, but anything you say can and will be used in federal court." The room went silent. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Constance. Marcus Bennett, standing beside me, added his own weight. "Mrs. Pettin, would you like to explain the funds that were diverted into your personal business accounts? Or perhaps why your property sits on land legally designated as community green space?" Constance's face cycled through confusion, denial, and panic. "These are privileged financial matters," she stammered, "and they have no bearing on HOA operations." Agent Bennett interrupted, her tone firm. "Nothing is privileged about federal wire fraud. You are under investigation for embezzlement, bribery of a public official, and conspiracy to commit property theft." The room erupted with whispers and gasps. Henderson stood, his voice rising above the din. "You forced families to pay twice for landscaping, fined us for non-existent violations, and lived on stolen property for 6 years. Neighbor after neighbor stepped forward, recounting years of harassment, fraudulent fees, and intimidation. Johnson held up photographs of HOA-mandated changes that directly benefited Constance. Laura recounted the fines imposed on her family for imaginary infractions. The evidence was overwhelming, and Constance's attempts to regain control were futile. Then came her fatal mistake. In a moment of desperation, she shouted, "You don't understand leadership. I've improved property values, removed problem residents, and maintained standards that benefit everyone. If that required creative financing, then so be it." Her confession hung in the air like a guillotine. Agent Bennett's pen moved quickly across her notepad, capturing every word. Marcus leaned in, his lawyer's instincts recognizing that the case had just been won. Constance's attorney grabbed her arm, whispering urgently. She ignored him, fueled by the illusion that dominance equaled invincibility. "I did what was necessary to protect this community," she screamed. "If you can't see that, it's your fault, not mine." At that moment, the room's energy shifted completely. The neighbors' collective outrage became a wave of empowerment. Deputy Martinez, standing with his family, called out, "You offered me money to falsify an official authorization. That's bribery, and it's a federal crime." The chaos reached its peak when Agent Bennett finally spoke again. "Constance Payton, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit property theft, and bribery of a public official." The handcuffs clicked, echoing in the stunned silence. Flashbulbs from cameras lit up the room as federal agents led Constance toward the exit. Her face was pale, eyes wide with disbelief, the mask of control shattered forever. I stepped up to the podium, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, "this community just reclaimed $850,000 in stolen property. Today isn't just about punishment, it's about reclaiming our rights and rebuilding what was taken from us." Applause began slowly, then swelled into a roar that could have been heard 3 blocks away. Neighbors hugged, tears flowing freely, as the weight of 6 years of fear lifted. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of the reclaimed lakefront property, watching my grandchildren play in the sand where Constance's illegal dock had once loomed. The federal judge had awarded $1.4 million in damages, the largest HOA fraud judgment in Ohio history. Constance had pled guilty to 14 federal charges, received a plea agreement requiring full restitution, and agreed to teach ethics classes to real estate professionals. Her husband resigned in disgrace, and they moved out of state to escape the shame. The community had transformed. The Henry Caldwell Memorial Community Center now stood where Constance's mansion once intimidated neighbors. It hosted children's art classes, senior bridge tournaments, and community workshops funded entirely by recovered funds. The Memorial Grove became the Millbrook Heritage Arboretum with 40 new trees representing every family in our neighborhood. Sarah's original oak stood at the center, its plaque reading, "In memory of love that grows stronger through seasons of storm." The ripple effects reached far beyond our street. Law schools began using our case as a study in HOA fraud, and Ohio passed the Millbrook Act requiring independent audits and criminal background checks for HOA board members. 3 other communities successfully reclaimed illegally privatized common areas, recovering over $2 million in assets. On a personal level, my retirement, once marred by harassment and grief, transformed into purpose. The Millbrook Property Rights Education Foundation, funded in part by the settlement, now provides free legal consultation for homeowners facing HOA abuse. We've helped 17 families recover over $300,000 in illegally charged fees. Last month, we hosted the first annual Tree Festival. Families spread picnic blankets under the shade of the Memorial Grove, children climbed on playground equipment built where Constance's Escalade once intimidated the neighborhood, and the smell of grilled burgers mixed with the sweet scent of blooming honeysuckle along the restored lakefront. Henderson, now our democratically elected HOA president, gave a speech on community resilience. Johnson presented transparent financial reports for the first time in years, and Deputy Martinez joined with his family to celebrate accountability and justice. The highlight of the festival was awarding a scholarship to Emma Rodriguez, a local high school student who planned to study property law. Her essay on defending community rights earned her $5,000 and a summer internship with Marcus Bennett's firm. Watching her excitement reminded me why all this effort mattered, not just money or property, but empowering people to stand up for what is right. As the sun set, painting the water gold and crimson, I reflected on how far we had come. Sarah's memory lived on in every smile, every laugh, and every family gathering on community land. The trees she loved had been destroyed, but their legacy had grown stronger. Communities, I realized, have immense power when they choose courage over compliance. And in Millbrook Estates, justice, once deferred, had finally blossomed. The weeks after Constance's arrest felt surreal. Millbrook Estates had been through a storm, and now we were finally seeing the calm that comes after justice. But calm didn't mean idle. There was a lot to rebuild: relationships, trust, and the very fabric of our community. Every morning, I walked past the Memorial Grove, watching the young saplings sway in the breeze. Each one represented a family, a story, a struggle, and a triumph. The grove had become more than a tribute to Sarah. It was a living testament to resilience. Henderson, now elected HOA president, invited me to the first official board meeting post-Constance. The room was filled with people eager to participate rather than cower in fear. The air felt charged with purpose rather than tension. We reviewed financial statements for the first time in years, transparent, accurate, and managed by people who actually lived here and cared. Johnson presented a new accounting software system that allowed any homeowner to see where funds were allocated in real time. No more hidden accounts, no more embezzlement. I listened as neighbors discussed the upcoming construction plans for the Sarah Caldwell Memorial Community Center. What had once been Constance's symbol of control, the illegal lakefront mansion, would now be a place where children could learn, play, and explore, where seniors could gather for bridge tournaments, and where everyone could feel welcome. I felt a lump in my throat, imagining the laughter and life that would replace intimidation and fear. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of the playground equipment, Deputy Martinez approached me. "Henry," he said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you again for encouraging my wife to come forward. This whole case might never have seen daylight without your persistence." I nodded, feeling the weight of his gratitude. We both knew how dangerous it had been to confront Constance, but we also knew that courage was contagious. The Memorial Grove grew slowly but beautifully. Volunteers planted flowers beneath each tree, creating a tapestry of colors and scents. We installed plaques with each family's name and a short message about resilience, unity, or community service. My eyes lingered on Sarah's oak, its brass plate gleaming in the sunlight. in memory of love that grows stronger through seasons of storm. It was poetic justice of the highest order. Her memory had not only survived Constance's chainsaw, but had inspired an entire neighborhood to stand up, reclaim their rights, and rebuild together. A community festival was scheduled for the summer, the first real celebration of what we had accomplished. We named it the Millbrook Heritage Tree Festival. Flyers went up, social media posts spread the word, and excitement bubbled among families who had felt powerless for far too long. We organized picnic areas, food trucks, live music, and even educational workshops about property rights and community governance. Every detail was planned with transparency and inclusivity, a stark contrast to the secrecy and fear of Constance's regime. The day of the festival, I walked along the restored lakefront, watching children splash in the water, their laughter ringing through the air. Neighbors mingled, sharing stories, recipes, and advice. Some recounted the horrors they endured under Constance, but each tale ended with a note of triumph. It was as if the weight of fear had been lifted collectively, and for the first time in years, people could simply enjoy being part of a community. During the festival, we presented the Emma Rodriguez Scholarship. Emma, now a bright-eyed high school senior, stepped up to the podium with a mix of nervousness and excitement. She spoke eloquently about the importance of legal knowledge in protecting community rights. Her essay, which had earned her the scholarship, became part of the educational materials we now provided to homeowners seeking guidance against HOA abuse. Watching her, I was reminded that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about empowerment and education. Marcus Bennett's firm continued to play a role, offering pro bono legal consultations to residents across the state. Stories poured in from communities facing similar HOA abuse. Using the Millbrook case as precedent, they recovered over $2 million in illegally held assets. It was extraordinary to witness how one small neighborhood's fight had ripple effects far beyond our streets. Even local legislation began to change. The Ohio legislature passed the Millbrook Act, mandating independent audits, criminal background checks for HOA board members, and transparent financial reporting. Suddenly, Constance's tactics, once invisible and untouchable, were now legally constrained. Other neighborhoods could fight back before abuse escalated to criminal activity. Our struggle had become a template for systemic change. Personal closure came quietly, away from the legal triumphs and media coverage. I spent evenings walking the lakefront, watching sunsets with my grandchildren. Their laughter and chatter replaced the memories of destruction with something new: hope, continuity, and a sense of belonging. I told them stories about Sarah, about the trees, and about the power of standing up for what is right. Her legacy had become theirs too, woven into every aspect of Millbrook's rebirth. Volunteering became a regular part of my life. I helped organize workshops on HOA rights, teaching neighbors how to document violations, gather evidence, and navigate legal avenues. The foundation we created with part of the settlement, Millbrook Property Rights Education Foundation, thrived. It became a hub where homeowners from across Ohio could access guidance and support, ensuring that no one would face abuse alone again. The Henry Caldwell Memorial Community Center flourished. Art classes, STEM workshops, and senior activities filled the calendar. The center became a hub for connection, learning, and celebration, a tangible manifestation of what could grow from courage and unity. The community garden blossomed with vegetables and flowers, maintained by volunteers who took pride in contributing to something bigger than themselves. I took a moment to stand at the podium in the center, imagining Constance's former arrogance melting into dust. The lake stretched before me, calm and clear, reflecting the sky and the trees, every detail reclaimed and restored. The smell of blooming flowers mixed with the scent of grilled food from the festival, creating a sensory tapestry of renewal. Neighbors approached me throughout the day, offering thanks, sharing smiles, and recounting personal victories since reclaiming their rights. Some had resolved lingering property disputes. Others had built new friendships and strengthened old ones. For the first time, Millbrook Estates felt like a true community, connected, resilient, and proud. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water gold and crimson, I reflected on everything that had transpired. The journey had been long and painful, but it had also been transformative. The destruction of the oak grove, which once felt like the end, had become the catalyst for renewal. Sarah's memory had grown stronger, and our community had grown wiser, more vigilant, and more united. I stood quietly by her oak, watching children play and neighbors chat. A sense of peace settled over me, a quiet acknowledgement that the battle had been worth it. Communities, I realized, possess immense power when they choose courage over compliance, documentation over silence, and solidarity over fear. And in Millbrook Estates, that truth had been proven beyond doubt. With the festival winding down, families began heading home, laughter still lingering in the air. I lingered a moment longer, touching the brass plaque on Sarah's oak. "We did it, Sarah," I whispered. "We honored your memory, and we built something that lasts." The Millbrook Heritage Tree Festival concluded not as a celebration of victory over one person, but as a testament to what communities can achieve when they act together with justice, integrity, and love. The legal battles were over, but the spirit of the neighborhood, resilient, connected, and empowered, would endure for generations. And as I walked home that evening, the sun setting behind the restored lakefront, I knew that what began with 6 destroyed oak trees had become a movement. Our story was no longer just about retribution. It was about legacy, education, and hope. A reminder that even in the darkest times, communities can reclaim what is theirs and grow stronger together. Months had passed since the Millbrook Heritage Tree Festival, and life in our neighborhood had settled into a rhythm I hadn't imagined possible. The lakefront, once a battleground, now shimmered peacefully under the afternoon sun. Children laughed as they skimmed stones across the water, their carefree joy a sharp contrast to the tension that had defined the past 6 years. Every time I saw them, I was reminded of why we had fought so hard, not just for property, not just for justice, but for the future of this community. The Henry Caldwell Memorial Community Center had become the beating heart of Millbrook Estates. Classes ran from morning until evening: art, music, STEM workshops, and senior activities. The garden bloomed with vegetables, flowers, and herbs, cultivated by families eager to contribute to something bigger than themselves. Every corner of the center told a story of resilience, of neighbors reclaiming control over their own lives. Our legal victory had created ripple effects far beyond our streets. Other Ohio communities began citing the Millbrook case as precedent, successfully reclaiming illegally privatized common areas and recovering stolen HOA funds. I received letters from homeowners I'd never met, thanking me for paving the way. Marcus Bennett's firm continued offering pro bono legal assistance, and the Millbrook Property Rights Education Foundation grew into a resource hub for ordinary people fighting extraordinary abuse. Even Constance's departure left a lasting mark, though not in the way she had intended. Her attempts to manipulate, deceive, and intimidate had united us in ways no one could have predicted. Families who had been cautious, isolated, or distrustful began organizing block parties, volunteer cleanups, and educational workshops. We'd learned that corruption thrives in silence, but communities thrive in solidarity. I often walked the restored Memorial Grove, pausing at Sarah's oak in the center. The brass plate gleamed in the sunlight, in memory of love that grows stronger through seasons of storm. I knelt, tracing the carved initials, and spoke softly. "This is for you, Sarah. For every neighbor who found courage, for every tree we replanted, and for every injustice we refused to accept." The Millbrook Heritage Tree Festival had become an annual event, celebrating not just our reclaimed land, but also the spirit of community. Children planted saplings alongside their parents, each tree representing a family's commitment to vigilance, care, and connection. Emma Rodriguez, the scholarship recipient, returned each year to mentor young students interested in law and civic responsibility. Watching her grow reminded me that education and empowerment were the most enduring legacies of our struggle. Even Deputy Martinez and his wife became fixtures at community events, Their courage in coming forward had helped tip the scales, and now they shared their experiences with others, showing that accountability and integrity are choices everyone can make, even in difficult circumstances. Standing on the restored deck overlooking the lake, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, $1.4 million in damages awarded, illegally occupied property reclaimed, and Constance facing the consequences of her actions. But the real victory wasn't financial or legal. It was the rebirth of Millbrook Estates as a neighborhood defined by unity, fairness, and mutual respect. I looked at the water, glinting gold in the sunset, and realized something profound. 6 destroyed oak trees had sparked a fight that revealed not only the greed of one person, but the incredible strength of a community that refused to bow. From devastation had grown education, connection, and hope. The story of Millbrook Estates was no longer about fear or loss. It was about courage, justice, and the lasting power of neighbors standing together. And as I walked home, the smell of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass filling the evening air, I knew this was only the beginning. Millbrook Estates had been transformed, not just physically, but morally and socially. Communities everywhere could take a page from our story, document, organize, and act. Because when ordinary people choose courage over compliance, nothing, not even years of corruption, can withstand the force of collective determination. Even after the dust settled, I realized the story of Millbrook Estates wasn't truly over. The court cases, the fines, and the arrests had all concluded, but the lessons we learned continued to resonate every day. I often found myself reflecting on how a few destroyed trees had exposed a web of deceit and greed, and how standing together had turned devastation into something far more meaningful. The Sarah Caldwell Memorial Community Center had exceeded every expectation. Classes were overflowing, volunteers came from neighboring towns, and families who'd barely spoken before were now planning projects together. It became a hub for education, recreation, and civic engagement. Emma Rodriguez, our scholarship winner, returned every year to mentor high school students interested in law, environmental protection, and property rights. Watching her guide the next generation made me feel like our fight had extended far beyond Millbrook Estates. One morning, I was walking along the lakefront when Henderson approached, holding a clipboard filled with notes. "Henry," she said, "I've been thinking. There are still neighborhoods out there where HOAs run unchecked, where residents are intimidated or cheated out of their property. We could help them." I nodded, realizing she was right. The Millbrook Property Rights Education Foundation could grow into a regional and eventually national resource. We started hosting webinars, sending guides to HOA members, and providing legal consultations to communities facing abuse. Our case became a blueprint, how to document, organize, and fight back effectively. It wasn't about revenge, it was about empowerment. I felt a sense of fulfillment that went far beyond the victory over Constance. We were creating a movement, one neighborhood at a time. At home, I tended to the Millbrook Heritage Arboretum. Each tree had a plaque representing a family in our neighborhood, a small symbol of hope, resilience, and shared commitment. Walking among them, I often paused at Sarah's oak. It was the heart of the grove, a reminder of why I had fought so hard. The carved initials she'd left long ago had been destroyed in the illegal cutting, but in their place stood an entire community's memory of her, a living testament to love, perseverance, and justice. Even Richard Petton, Constance's husband, occasionally reached out to apologize. He had resigned from city council in disgrace and moved away with her, but there were signs that even in exile, the consequences of their actions weighed heavily. It was a reminder that corruption leaves no one untouched, not just the victims, but those who enable it. One day, a neighbor asked me, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't acted?" I paused. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Without action, Millbrook Estates would have remained under Constance's control. Funds would have continued to disappear, property would have remained illegally privatized, and the fear would have persisted. It was a stark lesson in vigilance. Courage is not optional when injustice appears, it is essential. The Millbrook Tree Festival had become an annual tradition, growing bigger each year. Families planted new trees, celebrated environmental stewardship, and taught children about civic responsibility. The festival reminded everyone that protecting a community takes effort, vigilance, and teamwork. Each year, when the sun set over the restored lake, I could see Sarah's influence everywhere: smiles, laughter, and a sense of shared pride that no single person could ever steal. As I looked out over the water, I realized the final lesson of Millbrook Estates. Property rights, community integrity, and justice are intertwined. Protect one, and you protect all. Let them be challenged, and the consequences ripple far beyond a single home or family. Our story became more than a legal victory. It became a model, a guide, and a source of hope. I closed my eyes, letting the warm evening air carry the sound of children playing and neighbors chatting. For the first time in years, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Millbrook Estates had transformed, not just physically, but morally, socially, and spiritually. And I knew, in my heart, that Sarah would have been proud. Because when ordinary people stand together against corruption, when they act with courage, intelligence, and integrity, no system, no matter how entrenched, can withstand them. And that is the legacy we carry forward. Life in Millbrook Estates settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected. The chaos of the legal battles was behind us, but the effects of our fight against Constance Petton spread far beyond our neighborhood. I began receiving calls and emails from homeowners in nearby towns, many desperate and overwhelmed by their own HOA nightmares. They'd heard about our story, the legal victories, and the community's transformation, and they wanted guidance. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of letters. Each one told a story similar to ours: fraudulent fees, unauthorized property claims, intimidation, and systematic harassment. But reading them didn't bring fear. It brought clarity. Our experience had become a blueprint, a roadmap for ordinary people to protect themselves and their neighbors. Marcus Bennett and his team offered to consult remotely. He often joked that our Millbrook case was like a master class in HOA fraud, and now we were teaching it in real time. The Millbrook Property Rights Education Foundation started providing workshops, webinars, and free legal advice. We even launched a hotline for homeowners to report suspicious activity anonymously. Watching neighbors from other communities gain confidence in their rights reminded me of why Sarah's memorial trees had mattered. These weren't just trees, they were symbols of resilience, and that symbolism had multiplied. One afternoon, Henderson called me with excitement in her voice. "Henry, the Millbrook Act you helped inspire has finally sparked change statewide. 3 more communities reclaimed stolen property using our precedent. Over $2 million recovered already." I leaned back, letting the magnitude sink in. What started as a fight over 6 oaks had evolved into a statewide movement for fairness and accountability. Even environmental protection gained momentum. Local schools incorporated lessons from the Millbrook Heritage Arboretum into their curriculum. Students studied ecosystem preservation, the impact of mature trees, and responsible urban planning. Children who once only saw playgrounds now learned to understand the value of living, breathing history. Every time I walked through the grove, watching kids climb, read plaques, and plant saplings, I felt a sense of continuity. Sarah's legacy wasn't just remembered, it was alive. The media attention that had once focused on Constance's downfall now highlighted the power of community. National outlets reached out to cover Millbrook Estates as a model for civic action. One evening, while reviewing an article with Henderson, I realized something profound. We had turned tragedy into inspiration. Our fight was no longer just about legal victories or stolen property. It was about proving that ordinary people could challenge entrenched corruption and win. At home, I noticed subtle changes in daily life. Neighbors greeted each other with warmth instead of suspicion. Volunteer crews replaced intimidation squads. Shared dinners, book clubs, and community gardening had returned, stronger than before. Even Deputy Martinez, who once carried the weight of betrayal and coercion, now attended community picnics with his family, sharing laughs instead of tense exchanges. One particularly reflective evening, I found myself at Sarah's Oak.
The sun dipped low over the lake, reflecting gold and crimson across the water. I touched the plaque at its base and whispered, "We did it, Sarah. We turned grief into growth." The wind carried the scent of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass, mingling with children's laughter. It was a sensory reminder that life, justice, and memory could coexist beautifully when nurtured with care. The ripple effect extended even further. A high school in another county used our story in its civics curriculum. College students studied the Millbrook case as a precedent in law and urban planning classes. Our legal battles were now teaching future generations the importance of diligence, courage, and community organization. It was strange, humbling, and thrilling to realize that our struggle over stolen property and felled trees had become a tool for education and empowerment. Finally, I understood the truth that had guided me all along. Protecting a single grove of trees or a single neighborhood was about more than legality. It was about cultivating a culture of accountability, resilience, and collective responsibility. Every family that felt safe, every child that learned a lesson in civic duty, and every community inspired to fight injustice became part of Sarah's living memorial. And so, as I walked along the restored lakefront, I smiled. Millbrook Estates was no longer a story of corruption, destruction, or fear. It was a story of hope, courage, and the unstoppable power of a united community. And I knew, deep down, that our ripple had only just begun.
The final chapter of our Millbrook Estates saga wasn't marked by courtroom drama or flashing cameras. It was quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying. Standing on the deck of the reclaimed lakefront property, I watched my grandchildren play where Constance Peaton's illegal dock once loomed. The laughter, the splashing water, the gentle rustle of leaves, it all felt like a healing symphony. The federal judge's decision had been more than a victory. It was a statement. $1.4 million in damages, full restitution of illegally seized property, and Constance's guilty plea on 14 federal charges. Justice wasn't just served, it was visible, tangible, and lasting. Her husband had resigned in disgrace, and the couple had moved far away, leaving behind the ruins of intimidation and fear. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was the rebirth of our community. We transformed the stolen lakefront into the Henry Caldwell Memorial Community Center, a place where families gathered, children learned, and neighbors shared lives instead of grievances. The grove where my trees once stood became the Millbrook Heritage Arboretum. 40 new trees, each representing a family in our neighborhood, stood as living symbols of resilience, unity, and memory. Sarah's oak remained at the center, her engraved plaque reminding everyone that love and perseverance can grow even after destruction. Beyond Millbrook, our story inspired real change. The Millbrook Act enforced independent audits and stricter HOA oversight. Other communities followed our lead, reclaiming stolen property and recovering millions in misappropriated funds. Local schools taught our saga as an example of civic courage, environmental stewardship, and the power of collective action. Every time I received a letter from a neighbor fighting an abusive HOA, I was reminded that our fight had sparked hope far beyond our lakefront. Even on a personal level, the transformation was profound. My grief for Sarah, once compounded by Constance's harassment, had been reshaped into purpose. The Millbrook Property Rights Education Foundation, funded partially by our settlement, now offered free legal consultations to homeowners. We helped families recover funds, defend property, and restore dignity. Each case was a chance to honor Sarah's memory, to protect what she had symbolized for me: love, care, and the courage to stand for what is right. As the sun set over the lake, painting the water in gold and crimson, I realized that Millbrook Estates was no longer defined by fear or corruption. It was defined by what happens when ordinary people refuse to be intimidated, when they stand together, and when they transform grief and loss into action. Sarah's legacy, once threatened by chainsaws and greed, had grown stronger than ever. I took a deep breath, the scent of honeysuckle and freshly planted trees filling my lungs, and whispered softly, "This is for you, Sarah, for all of us." And in that moment, I knew that our story wasn't just about fighting injustice. It was about creating something enduring, beautiful, and just. A story of hope, courage, and the unstoppable power of a community united.